Dreaming of a better sleep? Tossing and turning is not your destiny. And Ollie is here to help. Ollie invites you to sink into sweet, sweet slumber to improve your mental and physical health and overall wellness. More than just melatonin, Ollie's ingredients help you unwind your mind for a delightfully dreamy drift off. Sleep is on the way at Ollie.com. That's OLLY.com.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today's show will be really digging into House Bill 626. It's a House bill that, as it sits right now in its position, I think is quite obviously a First Amendment violation and will end up, if it passes through the Senate as it sits, there will be a lawsuit over this, and it begs the question, why are representatives passing bills that are clearly First Amendment violations and what's going on there? So we'll be really digging into that. We'll also have a candidate for Senate District 17, a Julie Jaddock. I'll sit down with her and we'll talk a little bit about the race there, a little bit about who she is. We'll probably be doing more of those kinds of interviews with candidates, both incumbents and challengers, when we get kind of out of the legislative session, more into the campaign season. And we'll be digging into Tayna Fogle, city council person, finds herself arrested. We'll be going over what that has to do, what she did there. What Tayna Fogle do? The person who once cried about being too far away from the door and having to walk 2 feet farther. I'm not kidding. That really happened. Anyways, but if you want to reach out to the show, feel free to head on over to theandrewshow.com. theandrewshow.com. You can find all past shows there. You can find links to places to listen, as well as you can have a contact form there if you want to reach out to the show. I do want to remind you about tonight's meeting. For those of you who are unaware, I will be in Crab Orchard, Kentucky tonight at 6 o'clock at the Broughton Town Center. Crab Orchard, Kentucky, 6 o'clock, a guest of the Lincoln County Republican Party. So if you're in the area, decide you want to stop by the Broughton Town Community Center at 6 o'clock, I encourage you, head on over there, get to meet me if you've never before and hear me give a fantastic speech. But first, let's dig into Tayna Fogle's mishap. So for those of you unaware, Tayna Fogle is a pretty newly elected, past couple of years, councilwoman, I believe for the 1st District. And I remember the 1st District because, just to give you an idea of who this person is, Tayna Fogle once called a seating chart so in the Lexington City Council, they have district seats, right? And it's numbered 1 through 15, and then the vice mayor and the 2 other at-larges are there in the middle. So, and then there's 15 seats there total. And so they just numbered them 1 through 15 to create a seating chart because, well, there was a fight over where to sit. And then they just assign people according to their council district number. 1 sat in seat 1, 2 in seat 2, so on and so forth. And there was once that the Lexington City Council, and this happened this past year, went through a long debate about this seating chart, like they're a bunch of toddlers. And Tayna Fogle was the worst of them, sitting there throwing a little fit about how she'd have to walk too far to the door because sometimes she's got to leave because she's crying so much because of what's going on. This is literally what she said. She said she cries so much that she would need to be closer to the door so she could excuse herself. You see, that's very important. Then she also called the seating chart racist. That's right. She called it racist because even though it was just numbered numerical, it just appeared kind of racially segregated. And so that was a, quote unquote, problem for her. Well, Tayna Fogle's fit throwing apparently doesn't come only with seating charge. This from LEX 18. Lexington Fayette Urban County Council member arrested following disorder. This is their report. They say Lexington police say Lexington Fayette Urban Council member was arrested on Sunday at 3:11 p.m. after they responded to a business on Richmond Road for a disorder. According to an arrest citation, 64-year-old Tayna Fogle was arrested after refusing to leave the AT&T store. When they arrived on scene, police said Fogle had become belligerent inside the store and refused to leave after several requests from a manager. The arrest citation states that an officer also asked Fogle to leave the store multiple times or that she would be arrested, but she continued to ignore the officer and converse with the manager. She then began to leave but stopped to continue speaking to the manager. At this point, the officer says he placed his hands on her to escort her out. She then snatched her arm away in an aggressive manner and seemed as if she was going to strike the officer. According to the arrest citation, the officer then told Fogle that she was under arrest, and she responded with, "I'm not under arrest," according to the police citation. The arrest citation states that Fogle ignored the officer in an attempt to place her hands in handcuffs, but was restrained with the assistance of a second officer. Fogle is charged with third-degree criminal trespassing, menacing, and resisting arrest, and is lodged in the Fayette County Detention Center. Her arraignment is scheduled for March 15th at 1 p.m., and the mayor's office has declined to comment on the arrest. Now, I hate cell phone stores as much as the next guy. My wife will tell you. Actually, this past Sunday, I too had to stop in a cell phone store. They're very annoying. I tell you what, just a minor moment here. I use Verizon Business, and Verizon Business doesn't have customer service open on the weekends, which is super, super annoying. So, I hear you. I hate dealing with cell phone companies too. I mean, I think it's all a scam. They don't even give you free phones anymore. All of you who've had cell phones for long enough know exactly what I'm talking about. They make you pay $1,200 for new phones, and you have to get a finance plan on them, or you can pay cash. It's just all ridiculous. We all know. We all think cell phone stores are ridiculous, though I have never been arrested in one for disorderly conduct. And it makes a lot of sense. Like I said, she's throwing a fit about seating charts. Apparently, she's also throwing fits in cell phone stores, according to the police record, and thinking she's just above the law. She can ignore the police. No wonder why she was a big part of that kind of that BLM, defund the police movement, and she was a big pusher of that. Apparently she doesn't like the cops. She thinks she's above them. She doesn't got to listen to them. I mean, according to the report, she said she was under arrest, and she responded with, "I'm not under arrest." Well, Tayna Fogle, it doesn't matter if you're a city council person. That's not how this world works. You will be under arrest. Now, I want you guys to think about how belligerent or over the top she had to be. She must have been. I haven't seen video for this, but just think about this, okay? You're in Lexington, a very liberal city. I'm sure at some point Tayna Fogle made sure to inform them she's a city council member, and I'm sure that the police understood she was probably a city council member. She was also a black woman city council member. Unarmed, too. Unarmed. And so you can't imagine the amount of turmoil that arresting officer has to be in when they're saying, I've got a black female city council member, and I'm going to have to arrest her. In a liberal town like Lexington, they would do anything they could to not arrest her. But apparently she made it so hard for them that he had to call in a second officer in order to deal with this situation. A second officer had to be called in. And it just tells you exactly who these people are. This is the same woman who said that the gas stations need to stop calling the police on homeless people who trespass on their property. Private property owners need to stop calling the police on homeless people that trespass. And maybe she was just talking about herself. Maybe Tayna Fogle is the homeless person in this case, and she's been homeless, and she's tired of people calling the police on her for trespassing, because that's exactly what she got in trouble for. It's absolutely, she literally chastised her own constituents for calling the police to trespass people off their private property. Well, we can see why she'd be pushing that, don't you? I certainly can see. I certainly can pay attention. I think at least there's got to be some sort of sanction here. There's got to be something to point out just how ridiculous this entire behavior is. There's got to be something. because frankly, this is not only unbecoming for a city council member, this just isn't how a civilized person acts in a civilized society. Personally, I don't think we need uncivilized people sitting on our city council in Lexington. That's just my 2 cents. But you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Coming up after this, we'll have that interview from Julie Jaddock. We'll have that in a few short minutes. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. I'm joined by Julie Jaddock. Julie is running for state senate for Damon Thayer's former seat. That's Fayette County, Scott County, a bit of Grant, and half of Kenton. That's right. Okay. And that's a seat opening up as Thayer's kind of moving along. So you're running in that primary there. Let's start us off, Julie. Tell me, why did you feel a need? I've ran for office. I've ran for state senate. It kind of sucks. I wouldn't wish it on my greatest enemy. It's definitely something where, I know I had to be convinced and dragged into and really had to be felt real called to. Why did you feel a need to run? Why are you running? And
Well, Andrew, what you talk about being called, I felt that same thing. And you're right. This is not a position for fun. It is a position, really, when you choose to get into a race like this, it's truly a walk of self-sacrifice, especially what I'm fighting for is a voice for the people. And it's a selfless drive. And I really believe we need someone who is listening, caring, hearing, and standing on principles for the people of our community.
Who do you think you best align with? What would be your thought there?
You know what? And I'll just look on the local scene. But when I look at some of our senators in office right now, I look at Titchener. Sorry, I probably mispronounced that. I look at Savannah Maddox. I look at some of our leaders in there that are really, they're fighting for pro-family values, and in that there's some other names along the way, but there is a group. There really are. We have moved forward in Kentucky, and so when I see what's happening, I want to jump on board and be another one linking arms with folks who are fighting for pro-family, for parents' rights, for school choice. These things matter in our community because they truly, when we bring free market and we bring those things in, it really allows people to rise up who have a heart for things and to make a difference in our community.
What do you think when you look at the Senate now? Let's start off with, what do you think it's doing well? What do you think the Senate is?
State Bill 150. Passed last session, and in that bill, we're protecting parents' rights. We're protecting children from an agenda that is just not healthy or natural for children, and we're protecting children and families. That the family unit is where decisions are made.
What do you think the Senate's doing poorly? What do you think you hope to change?
I'll tell you one thing right now that I'd like to see. That Callaway has a bill that he's working forward. I'm not sure where it's at right now, but is fighting.
Josh Callaway?
Josh Callaway.
It ain't moving.
It's not moving.
Because
okay.
Leadership hates him, and they would never move a single one of his bills.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, his bill is great for family. And folks, if you don't know about his bill, look it up and let's fight for what he's doing there, because it will protect. It's dicey because you're on the edge of our protecting our rights, but at the same token, these are minors that have access with. Well, let's go to the bill for a second. But basically, what Callaway is trying to protect is that right now, you ask your children. They can jump on their phone and they can just say, "Oh, by the way, I'm 25 years old when I'm 12," and they can then the world is opened up to them.
You're talking about his pornography bill.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And so
I know this goes on the radio, and sometimes you get a little nervous about what words you can say or can't say.
I appreciate that.
Don't worry, if you say something wrong, I'll bleep it.
Yeah, okay, good to know.
I'll let everybody else's imagination fill it in.
Yes.
But you're talking about his requirement for age verification in order to watch pornography.
That's right. Exactly. And folks, I think this is just common sense. We need to protect our youth from this open doorway of the internet, especially on our phones that are available everywhere we go.
So switching gears a little bit, because there's a few pieces of legislation in our legislature. I think Shane Baker has the bill that would require parental consent to join social media if you're under 18, okay. Right? I believe it's Shane Baker. I could be mistaken. Obviously, I'm in the moment talking to you. Sure. Normally, for y'all who listen, I pull my bills off the top of my head real quick. But I believe it's Shane Baker, and he's got a bill to require parental consent in order to join social media. Now, on the national level, we're seeing, things like the TikTok bills getting a lot of talk, where, they're looking at banning TikTok. Now, that specific bill, even if maybe you're somebody who's for banning TikTok, there's good reasons to be against that bill at the federal level because it gives the president way too many broad powers and all these other things. Yeah. But putting that to the side, where do you think the balance comes in when we're looking at things like social media, when we're looking at things like internet activity, like as far as this pornography side of things? Where do you think the balance comes in between balancing a person's First Amendment rights and a right to have access to these things, coupled with then the rights or the responsibility, I guess, if you'd call it that, of the state to quote unquote protect its citizens? If what do you think its role is there?
Okay, so let's just give a hypothetical, because this becomes the parents' role. The parents are our first. If we can build the family as our most powerful economy, I believe that's what we need to do. That is, so everything, when we look at that, the family is the unit that cares the most about those people in that unit and know how to teach, protect, and bring up that unit for a healthy place. So let's say the family's walking down the street, and as they walk down the street and they see totally inappropriate pictures just blasted everywhere, at some point I think that we as law-abiding citizens and law-providing citizens will say, you know what, we don't want that out in public just where anybody can walk by and see it. So at that point, that is a litmus test that says, when we look at the internet, do we want the family with children just to be able to walk by this completely adult material? That, I think, is a place where we can go, yes, this does not infringe on our rights. This assists the family in protecting their children. So therein would this is a very tricky spot. What you're talking about is important, and this is where law and law writing is so important that we do it effectively, because there's unintended consequences along the way with that. However, that, I think, becomes a very clear thing that we do not want that to be a mark of our society, that this is just something that can just be easily accessible and walked by without a care or a gate or a door that says, no, you can't enter here without some parental consent.
So rewinding, I'd ask you, what would you like to see improved in the Senate, right? You'd mentioned Callaway's bill. We kind of got off on a tangent there. We've seen some bills in the Senate, on similar things, advancing, not advancing, those kinds of things. Specifically, you mentioned that bill. Are you saying you'd like the Senate to consider more of that legislation? Are you saying you'd like them to move those things through?
I'd like to see Callaway's bill move through. And then on a whole nother topic, Marianne Proctor is working on the CON, the Certificate of Needs. And I think people need to know what's going on with this. Mm-hmm. But she has a bill, and I believe it is stuck in potentially committee. I'll have to look that up.
It's stuck in House committee.
Okay. And she has three bills. It's 202, 203, and 204, I believe. And those bills, and folks, just, you're sitting at home listening to this going, how does this impact me? People are not getting the care they need because we are not truly a free market Kentucky when it comes to medical care. And so these bills are being held up for whatever sets of reasons. We can leave that speculation for whatever. But as a citizen and as you're listening to this matters to us because what's happening there's companies trying to come into Kentucky to bring more medical competitive care to us, which would, as the end user, allow us to have better imaging resources, would allow us to have better rehab care. It would allow us better mental health facilities, all these things. We would have a more competitive market if we change what's called the CON or the Certificate of Need. And what Marianne Proctor's bill is asking is basically reducing the requirement to prove that Kentucky actually needs this care. That's what's happening. And I think there's been a ton, you probably can speak on this, but a ton of litigation that has happened. One company spent, I think, over $1 million trying to come into Kentucky to prove that, hey, Kentucky actually needs more medical facilities. And after years of trying to come in as a business and build business in Kentucky, I believe it was a local court that shot it down, and therefore this company spent millions of dollars, never was ever able to open a medical business, competitive business in our state or in our Commonwealth. And then in addition, this is all because of the Certificate of Need ruling. And then what ends up happening is instead of the people deciding, hey, I want to go to this facility or that facility, and if that facility isn't a good facility, it goes out of business. What's happening is the courts are deciding, no, we don't want a competition for the medical facilities that we currently have in Kentucky. So effectively, and hear this clearly, and if you care about it, get on the phone and call your representatives and call your senators. But what's happening is medical businesses cannot come into Kentucky without a huge major battle and fight to get in here.
Well, Julie, I appreciate you for joining us. How can people reach out? How can people learn more about you?
They can reach out to me at Jaddock. That's JADDOCKFORKY.com. You'll find my website there. And I tell you what, reach out to me and I'll call you because I really care.
Jaddock like paddock.
That's right. Jaddock like horse paddock. That's right.
FORKY.com.
That's right. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Check her out on Twitter, Facebook, and everything else as well. Follow along. We'll be following along this race. Thank you so much for joining us and answering a few questions today.
Andrew, thanks for having me, and thanks for being in the fight.
Absolutely. We'll be back after a few short minutes. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know who you read or who you follow up with, but one of the people I like to read and reference when I'm looking at government is Murray Rothbard. And in his book, Anatomy of the State, he made this statement. He said, "We can test the hypothesis that the state is largely interested in protecting itself rather than its subjects by asking which category of crime does the state pursue and punish most intensely? Those against private citizens or those against itself?" I want you to remember that question. We know that the state is largely interested in protecting itself, not us, the citizens, by asking ourselves, which category of crime does the state pursue and punish most intensely? Those against private citizens or those against itself? Crimes committed against citizens, do those get punished more intensely? Or does somehow crimes against the state, crimes against the government, are those the ones that seem to get the ire of the state the most? Well, I think when we take a look at House Bill 626, we can answer Murray Rothbard's hypothesis tests by saying clearly the state is only interested in itself, it would appear. Now, what is House Bill 626? It just passed yesterday out of the House chamber after an interesting conversation on the bill. And first, let's talk about what the bill started out trying to solve. So there was an issue last year with these trans rights activists. And I covered this on the show at the time, where these trans rights activists, they went into the chamber They went into the gallery, and then during the voting process, they locked arms and started to yell as loudly as they could in order to disrupt and stop the procedures of the House. Now, clearly, you can't do that. You can't go into the chamber and then through the use of force try to shut down what the legislature's trying to do. That would be called the heckler's veto. And we should never allow a small minority that's just really, really loud to shut down the passage of what could be a good piece of legislation. That isn't how it works. This heckler's veto shouldn't be allowed. And so these individuals were arrested and charged with trespassing. And the punishment that the first one of these that was found guilty received was a fine of only $1. $1. Now, you think that dissuades anybody in the future from doing these types of things? No. Do you think it stops that person from even doing it again? No, most likely not. And so obviously the legislature says we need to take a look at this and deal with this problem. And they constructed this bill, House Bill 626. And half the bill I have no problem with. Okay, what the bill does is it creates a new section of KRS Chapter 519 that creates the interference with the legislative proceeding in the second degree and first degree. Now, I have no problem with the second degree thing. To read it to you, and people who listen to the show know, I read legislation to you. I do not want you to be confused on what it says. So this is what the bill says about second degree. So a person is guilty of interference with the legislative proceeding in the second degree when, with the intent to disrupt, impede, or prevent the General Assembly from conducting business, he or she knowingly enters into or remains inside, conspires to enter into or remain inside, or facilitates another person entering into or remaining inside a chamber or gallery of the General Assembly or another room inside a legislative building that is set aside or designated for use of the members of the General Assembly, or obstructs, impedes, or conspires to obstruct or impede or facilitates another person obstructing or impeding a legislator, legislative officer, or legislative staff members' ingress, egress, or movement within the legislative building. Interference with a legislative proceeding in the second degree is a Class B misdemeanor for the first offense and a Class A misdemeanor for a second or subsequent offense. No problem there at all. Misdemeanor crimes, mostly enforced through fines. It covers egress, ingress, movement within the legislative building, covers all of that. That's not a problem. The problem becomes, and where we're able to answer the question of, does the state care about its citizens or itself more? What is it punishing more? Comes in the first part, where we create interference of legislative proceeding in the first degree. It says the person is guilty of interference with the legislative proceeding in the first degree when, with the intent to disrupt, impede, or prevent the General Assembly from conducting business, he or she knowingly engages in, conspires to engage in, or facilitates another person engaging in disorderly or disruptive conduct in any legislative building, and that conduct disrupts, impedes, or prevents the General Assembly from conducting business. Interference with a legislative proceeding in the first degree is a Class A misdemeanor for the first offense and a Class D felony for a second or subsequent offense. Now, that is the problem. See, what I first read to you was dealing with what happens inside the chamber of the legislature. This is dealing what happens on the outside of the chamber of the legislature, in the Capitol building itself, for an example, the Capitol Rotunda. Now, I, as well as many other people, have organized and taken part in protests and rallies that take place inside the Capitol building at a time where we would express our feelings on a piece of legislation and what have you. We're outside of the chambers where we're allowed to be expressing our First Amendment rights. Here's the other problem. That when it comes to First Amendment, your freedom of speech, there's something called the public square, right? So for an example, just because you're on quote unquote public property doesn't mean you can necessarily protest there. You know, if something is not known as a common square or public square, a place of common protest. So an example might be you've got a problem with the way your highways are being taken care of, so you stand outside of or inside of even the local Department of or Cabinet of Transportation building their garage and you're inside the fences and you're holding up signs, like that's not a common place to protest. And so you could see them having you removed as not violating that First Amendment. However, when something has a historic feeling of being a place, a town square, a place where people's First Amendment activities on public property has taken place, then that is given a special protection. And the Capitol Rotunda, the Capitol building, falls under those special protections where it has historically been a place of First Amendment expression on legislation. And so this bill, as it reads here, already is entering into some realms of violating the First Amendment. But going back to once again, when I said, what does it concern itself with more? Punishing the crimes of citizen against citizen or citizen against the government itself? You see, let's go back to the punishments for this. It doesn't even make sense that when you're inside the chamber, you can only be charged at most with a misdemeanor. But when you move outside of the chamber and then disrupt or disorderly whatever, so you're chanting, you're taking part in a protest, now it's a Class A misdemeanor first offense. Second offense is a Class D felony. Y'all, a Class D felony, to give you an example of some other Class D felonies in this state: child pornography under 18, but over the age of 12, burglary in the third degree, assault in the third degree, and rape in the third degree. All of those are Class D felonies. Not to mention, a felony, you lose your right to own a firearm. So we're talking about taking away people's Second Amendment rights and charging them the same as we would somebody who has a child pornography featuring 13-year-olds and a person committing rape are all getting the same charge as somebody who protests too loudly. Because as we're going to hear in testimony, it's not that you're protesting, it's only if you're protesting too loudly. So for getting a little too loud as you're expressing your discomfort with the legislature, they now want to charge you with the same crime as they do rapists and pedophiles. Who's the state care about more? Protecting you or itself? But we're going to go over this floor debate after this short break. We're coming up on a break. We're going to go over what they said on the floor, what they had to say about it. After this, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. For the break, we've been digging into House Bill 626, a bill that would essentially make it illegal to be too loud in your protests if they're taking place inside a Capitol building. Not in the chamber, not in the gallery. The bill also does that, but I agree with that. Outside of the chamber, outside of the gallery, in the Capitol Rotunda, a place where rallies and protests are held all the time. I've held rallies and protests out there. And under this charge, under this bill, I could be charged with a felony equal to that of somebody who's committed rape or child pornography, and have my Second Amendment rights taken away if my protest gets a little too loud. I read the bill to you last time, but to remind you, specifically it says, he or she knowingly engages in, conspires to engage in, or facilitates another person engaging in disorderly or disruptive conduct in any legislative building, and the conduct disrupts, impedes, or prevents the General Assembly from conducting business. Disrupts them from conducting business in the building. So if you're protesting in the building, but you're outside the chamber, but you get a little too loud, we've done it all before. Well, now you can be guilty of a Class A misdemeanor first time, Class D felony second time, but also know that you also conspire to engage in. So under this bill, you could organize a rally or a protest inside the Capitol Rotunda, not even be there, but it gets a little loud and out of control, and now you can be charged with a misdemeanor, or if it's your second offense, a felony, receiving the same punishment, jail time, that pedophiles and rapists get. Protection of the state. That's what's most important to them. And so let's listen to the chamber arguments. For our first cutout I want to give here, John Hodgson, Representative Hodgson asked Representative, Blanton? Asked Representative Blanton about the bill and about some pieces of it. Let's hear what they had to say.
Mr. Sponsor, the way you've explained the specific scenarios and explained the law, I would be fully supportive of. However, as I read the language, it causes me to remember the years before I became a legislator when I protested in the rotunda, I protested on the front steps, I protested in the lawn, I protested on the patio. And some of those times we were threatened by the governor under arrest. So my concern here is that as I participated in those and as well as organized them, would I have been guilty of the conspiracy offense that you describe in here? Gentleman from McGoffin.
So, first of all, anything outside the buildings is not covered under this statute, okay? Secondly, going back over the years since I've been here, we've had this building literally restricted and not allowing any more people in because of fire issues. We were packed, and they were screaming and yelling outside these chambers. That voice did not get loud enough to prevent us from doing our business. So that would not be applicable. It's not stopping us from doing our business. This is just for those that are stopping us from conducting the business of the General Assembly.
So first thing here, if there's never been a time, he claims there's never been a time where the building, even entirely full, has been loud enough to stop their proceedings, to stop the chamber from taking action, which begs a few questions if that's your reasoning and honestly the case. First, why then is it even in the bill? Because remember, I already told you there's a portion about inside the chamber that already exists. Why is the entire legislative building covered? You can say, well, it's so you can't stop people from getting to the chambers, but that's also covered in the second part of the bill. Why is the first degree, which keep in mind, is more of a charge than if you cause a ruckus inside the chamber, outside the chamber? So why is it that is even being created here? And maybe it's never stopped the flow because, well, there's nothing you could do about it at the time but just power through and talk over the voices. Because you had nothing on the books and what they were doing was First Amendment protected clearly. But now if the speaker says, you know what, I think it's too loud, they can go ahead and say, arrest them too. But, all you could do was take it before, so they never even tried to stop it. But now this gives them tools to do something different. Now, Emily Calloway got a message from a person apparently, and she read it out loud on her phone and asked the sponsor to respond to it. Let's take a listen to that.
The first half, creating the crime of disrupting a legislative process in the first degree, I have a big issue with. It doesn't just say in chamber or in committee. It says if you are disruptive or conspire to be disruptive anywhere in a legislative building, you're guilty. The punishment for this is found guilty of 2 offenses is the same as someone being found guilty of child pornography. Over the last several years of organized rallies and protests that took place in the building, but outside the chamber, this bill would now make that illegal. Is organizing a protest outside the legislative chamber is worth the same punishment as child pornography or rape in the second degree, because that's what this bill does. Not only is there First Amendment concerns, but also it doesn't make logical sense. Why is protesting outside the chambers punished to a higher degree than causing an issue inside the chambers or committee hearing? The bill sponsor has stated that it has to be loud enough to stop the proceeding, but the bill says disrupt, not impede. Additionally, how loud does someone have to be to disrupt a proceeding is subjective, and people outside of the room would have no way of knowing if they are stopping the chambers from being able to carry out business or not. So I pose that as a question, like the sponsor to address.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lady, I will refer back to those times when she's talking about. Nobody was ever charged. Nobody was ever arrested.
Gentleman from McGoffin, address the chair, please.
Pardon? I'm sorry.
Speak in your microphone.
Yes, I'm sorry. No one was ever charged with these other things they've been using in the past, and I don't foresee that no one would continue to be charged. This is, and when you start getting into terminologies, those of you that are legalese know that everything is a matter of interpretation, and it's going to be whether the courts interpret disruptive or disorderly fits the criteria for these charges. So
what he just said there, right? She asked, great question. Whoever sent it to her, great question. And so she asks it, and his response is that, well, they were never charged because there wasn't a crime there. Yeah, because you're creating a statute. That's what you're doing. You're creating a law right now as we speak. Of course they weren't charged. There was nothing to charge them with. Second thing, what he just said about whether or not it's disruptive or not goes exactly against what he said to Representative Hodgson, what Representative Blanton said to Representative Hodgson earlier when Hodgson asked, I've taken part in protests inside here that have been louder. Are we going to get arrested? Like, well, it wasn't disruptive, didn't stop anything, so, no. But then you just said that it would be up to a judge to decide what's disruptive or not. Maybe to Representative Blanton, when the entire place was full, they couldn't let in anybody else. It wasn't disruptive. But maybe to a judge, they would say, you know what, I think that was disruptive. And then we had this moment here, pretty interesting, where he does get challenged on the felony thing. This just is a reminder. These representatives, they don't read their bills. They many times don't read things before they hit the floor. They don't even read their own things. And they're literally just either illiterate, liars, stupid. I don't know. It's up to you. But here's this question here that another Republican representative asked Representative Blanton.
Gentleman from Whitley for discussion of the matter.
Would the sponsor yield to a question?
He will yield.
Sponsor, you stated this was a Class B misdemeanor. Is that correct?
Gentleman from McGoffin.
on the first two offenses, yes.
So pause right there. He's already wrong. Because under the first degree, the first charge is a Class A misdemeanor, not a Class B misdemeanor. But of course, he just said on the first offenses for both. Yes, no, it's a Class A misdemeanor on the other. You're wrong, but continue.
Gentleman from Whitley.
Permission to speak on the bill, Mr.
Yes,
Speaker.
sir.
I just want to point out that it's Class B misdemeanor, which is a fine at most 90 days in the county jail. I think in the email we heard prior, someone maybe confused it with Class B felony, which is 10 to 20.
No, they weren't confusing Class B felony. Unlike you, Representative, they can read a bill. It clearly says interference with the legislative proceeding in the first degree is a Class A misdemeanor for the first offense and Class D felony for the subsequent offense. When these legislators argue, I have gotten into so many arguments with legislators about what's literally in a bill that's in black and white, and you just heard it there. You heard the bill's sponsor claim both are Class B misdemeanors. No, one's a Class A, one's a Class B. And then you heard the other guy say, I think they're confusing with Class B felony. No, they weren't. It was a Class D felony, which, by the way, is the same punishment as third-degree rape, as well as pedophilia above the age of 12. But, what do we know? We can only read. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If I were you, I'd be calling your senators, making sure they know that unless they change House Bill 636, House Bill 626, to be voting no on that. I'd be reaching out to them right now. Well, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.